Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 27. Two Necromutants locked their hands on my ankles and would have pulled me apart had the narrow confines not prevented it. Shrieking maniacally, they beat my legs against the steps and their lumpy fists against my legs. My armor made a horrible clacking as they assaulted it, and somewhere in their spoonful of brains, that sound told them that they were breaking me into little bits. This made them laugh even more forcefully, unhinging their jaws like boa constrictors who intended to swallow me whole. While the Necromutant on my left tried to twist my foot off, I stuffed the barrel of the AR-3000 in the mouth of the one on my right. His laughter died a second before I hit the grenade launcher switch. The 37mm grenade blasted through the back of its head, then bounced off the tunnel's ceiling and careened down to explode in the mass of Necromutants at the doorway. I pulled my left leg back and threw the Necromutant hanging on it off balance. He released my foot and finally regained his balance a couple of steps down, bracing his hands on either side of the passage. The Necromutant rose above my spread eagle body and roared at me. Homicidal fire lighting its eyes, it lunged at me. I scissored my legs. My right foot caught the side of his head. My left foot swept through his neck. Pain shot up my left leg, but the gurgled scream filling the tunnel came from the Necromutant. Black blood geysered up to coat the tunnel's ceiling as the head caromed back down the stairs. The headless corpse stood upright in the passage, its limbs spasming as if it stood on a live wire. For a second it blocked the tunnel, then exploded as gunfire from below ripped it to pieces. "Rex, stay down!" A stream of bullets from above gnawed the next two Necromutants into oozing heaps of twitching flesh. A golden light started from behind me, then something sizzled through the air and a heavy stench of ozone cut through the charnel house stink in the tunnel. The plasma bolt hit one Necromutant in the chest. Golden lightning played over its body, and the corpse began to dissolve from the inside out. Its swarmy flesh grew translucent, then blackened before the body burst into flame. The burning body formed enough of a bulwark for me to regain my feet and retreat up the corridor. The first step on my left foot shot pain from my ankle to my hip, but I forced myself to continue backing up. I gave Jan the right side of the hallway for her to shoot down, and I unloaded the last two grenades in my launcher back down that tunnel. Between them and a couple more plasma bolts, we slowed the pursuit, but could not stop it. I finally reached the first of the circles. Jan yanked me inside as Ash stepped into the opening and fired down the tunnel. I landed heavily as Ash's spent cartridges peppered me in a hot hail. Jan slapped a new clip into her plasma carbine, then knelt beside me. "You okay? You were limping." I glanced at the flashing light the computer had displayed in my field of vision, and a schematic of my body came up. The image focused on my left ankle, then zoomed in. It gave me a full readout of the damage, including recommended treatments and a probable date for full recovery. I snarled. "My ankle's broken. Can you go on?" "You think I'm gonna stay here?" I glanced up at Ash. "You're our Roland at the pass." The Attila's head swiveled toward me. "Information download to complete the cognitive association is unavailable at this facility." "No, of course it isn't. Next time, download everything you'll need for a mission before we head out." I shook my head. "Roland means nothing gets past you." Roland acknowledged. Jan helped me to my feet. "Follow when you can." Acknowledged. I sent Jan on ahead of me, and I limped after as fast as possible. The computer deadened most of the pain from my ankle, but could not get rid of all of it without numbing it entirely. If it did that, I'd lose my ability to know where my foot was, and I'd stumble and fall a lot more than I would without the minimal amount of pain the computer let through. 2 more landings further on, and I found an open door leading out to one of the balconies overlooking the nave. The rest of our crew had run out and around to another corridor leading deeper into the chapel. I followed as quickly as I could. Scattered gunfire skipped off pillars and walls around me, but none of it hit me. Occasionally I stopped and shot at necromutants trying to climb up the pillars to reach my level. More often than not, I sent their limp bodies sailing down to the floor to be pulped beneath the hooves of raging Ezeghouls. Up ahead, I heard shooting, and it sounded more heavy and concentrated than our group was capable of generating. As I came around the corner of the corridor, I saw our crew hunkered down behind cover on one side, and a handful of Brotherhood's sacred warriors on the other side. Backing down the hallway and through a huge double doorway, a cohort of undead Legionnaires and Necromutants fired their weapons at us. They formed an undead wall between us and the 2 large and incredibly strong gray-green-skinned humanoids, each of which bore a human under one arm. Though I never saw her face, I knew the female captive had to be Sandra. Her size and shape were difficult to judge at that distance, but the monster's jealous care for her and harsh glower back at us told me she was somehow sacred to it. The other monster, looking more sullen, yet just as protective of its prize, bore a man wearing the red robe of an archbishop. "Mitch," Alvarez's voice cracked over the radio. "You have 4 choppers and 2 fighters coming in from the Citadel to the north, all black technology. Don't engage, Julia. Bug out if you can. I have no choice but to engage. This sky ray may be a slow pig, but it's a well-armed pig. I'll be back when I can. Good luck." We could hear the rhythmic whooping of the helicopter's rotor through the doorway, and Titus pointed toward it. "There is a helipad out there. They are getting away with the hostages." The urgency in his voice rippled through me like an adrenaline booster shot. I suppose somehow in the back of my mind I knew that Ash would fall when he ran out of ammo for his cannon, and necromutants would surge up through the Cardinal's path to trap us. The Ezeghouls might be too large to use it, or even more conventional corridors spiraling up through the chapel, but those wider passages would easily accommodate Razids. We were trapped, and that would mean we would die. Dying without having rescued Sandra was something I could not contemplate. Dropping to my left knee, I jammed a new clip of 4 grenades into my AR-3000 launcher and pumped all 4 straight into the middle of their formation. Bodies flew high into the air, cartwheeling into collisions with the walls. Sliding down to the floor, they made smears amid the gore splatter the explosions had created. The hole the blast had torn in the necromutant formation was slow to fill. The taller creatures snapped orders at the Legionnaires. A half dozen of undead sought to close the doors to the chamber, while the rest started howling and screaming. Guns blazing, they charged out at us. Even though the corridor offered them no cover for their assault, the distance between us was quite short, and they fell upon us before we could do more than cut their numbers in half. In close-quarter combat, my assault rifle proved useless, except as a club. Because my most recent training had been in unarmed combat, I didn't need a club. The metal armor sheathing my body both protected me and made my attacks even more lethal than they would normally have been. I threw the empty rifle at one of the necromutants, knocking it down, then braced myself to fight more of them off. I ducked beneath the initial attempt of a zombie to bat my head back down the corridor with his clubbed rifle, then stabbed the stiffened fingers of my right hand up into his armpit. The blow pierced his side and severed both muscle and ligaments. His enthused follow-through of attack meant he tore his own arm off. Black blood splattered all of us as he pirouetted on past me. A stamp kick hyperextended another necromutant's right leg to the point of his knee popping. Then I punched his nose back into his brainstem. Throwing myself forward, I flew beneath a Legionnaire's snap kick. My headbutt to his groin upset him. Then I scrambled forward and landed both knees on his face. His skull crunched beneath my leg armor and the stone floor. Springing up, I found myself all the way through the other side of the Dark Legionnaire formation. Ahead of me, one of the tall Necromutants forced his Brotherhood captive back through the narrowing gap between the doors, then drew a wickedly barbed sword and stalked toward me. As the blade cut through the air, the weapon seemed to torture a shriek out of it. Not laughing, but cunning and confident. What my computer scanned, cross-referenced, and confirmed as a Centurion closed with me. It angled in at my left side, which meant it had noticed I was not fully mobile. Drawing my left leg back, I lowered myself into a crouch. Raising my hands in a guard, I waved it on. Do your worst. The first attack came high from my left to my right, and I slid away from it. As the Centurion recovered himself, I saw his grip shift on the sword. The return cut came in faster, letting me know the monster was left-handed. As I'd moved toward his strong side with my first retreat, this information came late, but still had its uses. Darting forward, I got inside the tall creature's attack circle. I grabbed his wrists in both hands and turned my body around, so for a second my back slapped up against his belly. Continuing my move, I slid back beneath his left arm, then dropped my knees and yanked down with all my strength. The Centurion flipped in the air and hit the ground hard on his back while his sword struck sparks from the floor. He was ready to bounce up, but I shifted my left hand down to lock his left wrist and twisted his arm around. If he leapt to his feet, his own weight would snap his arm or dislocate his shoulder. His only escape was to flop on his belly and then yank his hand from my grip. In a straight contest of strength, his left arm against my left hand, he would have no trouble winning. He knew that and probably already begun planning his attacks once he got the sword back in his hands. The reason I only used one hand to delay him was because my right hand was busy drawing and aiming my Punisher. The Centurion's eyes grew quite wide as I pressed the gun to his forehead and pulled the trigger. The first bullet only seemed to anger him, but the second and third snuffed the light of evil in his eyes. With the fourth and fifth, I felt the strength leave his limbs, so I used the seventh and eighth to further scramble his brains. Then I stood. Hunter smashed the butt of his assault rifle into the face of a Necromutant, and Yojimbo bisected one with a huge samurai sword. I waved the Mishiman forward, then pointed to the door. Mitch, blow it. Hunter dropped 2 grenades dead on target and blew one of the big bronze doors off its hinges. It spun into the room beyond like a top. Whirling on a corner, Yojimbo and I leapt in through the gap and saw the door whip through 2 Necromutants, then totter and fall on a third. I capped the fourth with 2 shots from my Punisher. Yojimbo parried a bayonet attack by one, then split him skull to breastbone with an overhead strike. Out beyond the glass wall, we saw a strange flying craft. It appeared to be a helicopter, and it clearly had metal and plastics as part of it, but I could not recognize it. My computer could not find a match because the craft had been warped and changed by the Dark Legion. Odd bumps and bulges like tumors twisted the metal of its flesh, and it appeared as if whatever the original craft had been, biological elements had been grafted to it to make it into something else entirely. The other Centurion tossed Sandra and the Brotherhood hostage through the side door, then climbed in itself. It kicked the last Necromutant in the face to drive it back toward us. Then the helicopter leaped up into the air and raced off toward the south. Out of frustration, I fired at the Necromutant on the helipad and struck him at least once. It didn't kill him, but it drove him off the edge of the landing area and had the grim satisfaction of hearing him scream for a couple of seconds before he hit the ground below. The others poured into the room, with Jan and one of Hunter's men, Redfield, taking up positions at the door. Aside from Ash being gone, I noticed 2 bodies in capital armor and 2 more sacred warriors being laid out in a corner. Lane seemed to be favoring his right arm, and Wendy Levine, the medic from Mitch's squad, was tending a nasty gash on Titus's forehead. Mitch shook his head. We lost 3 of ours, have 3 wounded, but picked up 4 Brotherhood sacred warriors. Not a good trade. Who did you lose? The Special Forces captain glanced at the corner. Vanetti and Halston. I looked around the room. This appears to be as good a place as any to make a stand. We can hold it until Alvarez can bring the Skyray in and pick us up. Mitch shook his head. Never work. Skyray is too heavy for a pad made for helicopters. If we can't get to the ground, she can't pick us up. Captain, I have incoming, non-hostile. 2 more sacred warriors came through the door. Behind them, 24 very frightened men, women, and children ran into the room. They stared screaming when they saw the Necromutant's body. They probably would have continued to do so, but Scythia marched into the center of the room, her black cloak flowing around her armor like a piece of shadow itself, holding aloft a black leather-bound copy of the Book of Law. The Brotherhood's crossed arrow insignia glinted gold from the corner and combined with her sheer presence to cow the civilians into mewing calm. She consulted briefly with one of the half-dozen sacred warriors who had shepherded the pilgrims into the room, then approached Mitch. I have been told that this is all that remains of the pilgrims here at Eternal Vigilance. An earlier convoy did head out to the south, but their fate is unknown and probably doubtful. It appears that the unit that assaulted Eternal Vigilance was originally meant to hold the flank in the Dark Legion counterattack against the Imperial counterassault at Cerberus. It diverted here to destroy Eternal Vigilance and apparently to take Lorraine Coven. I'll be sure to file that in the report we leave behind with our bodies here. Mitch loaded a new clip into his M50 assault rifle. Holding the high ground is a good strategy, but not when there's no way down. But there is, Captain Hunter. Scythia gestured at the helipad. Skyray can't land there. No, there is the requisite emergency evacuation equipment as required on all helipads. Scythia's voice made it all sound very matter-of-fact. While this is a place of worship, it was not constructed without consideration for the safety of our personnel and guests. That comment seemed incongruous with the slaughter around us, but I didn't point that out. If we're going to try to get to the ground from here, we'll need to draw them up here, so they'll have a hard time getting back down to pursue us. Agreed. Mitch looked at Scythia. Organize these people in evacuation parties and brief them on what they'll be doing. We'll send your sacred warriors down first to hold the ground for them. I'll get my people to shift the door around and rig it with explosives, so we'll turn it into one giant claymore mine. I'll need some rabbits to tease the enemy while we do this. I raised my hand. Rabbit reporting for duty. Jan, Pam, and Yojimbo joined me. Having lost my AR-3000 in the melee, I appropriated Halston's Gehenna Puker, and we went out to make the Dark Legion very, very angry at us. Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 27, End.